And I hope everybody can see this. So,
yes, we see.
Good. Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to thank Sasha for the presentation, because I was sort of thinking whether I would be speaking about the new handbook and the development of the European sort of the renewed peer review method, which was carried out a few years ago at the Finnish National Agency for Education. But it's good that you mentioned it, and it was an inspiration to Finland to actually start developing sort of their, in a way, own peer review tool, because we had a very big, a massive vocational education and training reform in 2018. And I won't be talking too much about the reform as such, but just a few pointers. The whole system turned from supply-oriented approach to demand-driven approach. So basically, the idea is that we're really listening to working life needs with really big ears, and sort of make the system as flexible as possible so that we can serve the working life and the labor market needs as well as we can. And then the system became even more competence-based and more customer-oriented. So every single student will be offered the possibility to design an individually appropriate path to finishing either an entire qualification or a part qualification, supplementing a special skill set, depending on their own need. So basically, every single individual has a little bit different kind of study path or learning path. Can't even talk about study path because learning takes place in various settings. And the reform also meant a big change to digital learning environments and new approaches to pedagogy. For example, using modern simulators at schools, it will have a larger role in the reform. And workplace learning is increased in the new system, and the funding system was completely renewed. So now before there were many funding mechanisms, but now there is a single funding system. So these were the basic major changes that were carried out in the big VET reform, and it was really the biggest reform since like 20 years or so. So then, of course, even though we have these European peer review systems for VET, but it was considered that now that we have this reform, we can use this methodology, but we need to tailor the peer review method and system so that it really answers the needs of the education VET providers according to the laws and regulations and other recommendations. So there are 15 different quality areas in the Finnish peer review system. And there is a Finnish handbook. It is unfortunately only in Finnish, but the main quality areas are in English. So I will show quickly to you what they are and how they are sort of how they correspond to the European one and to the Finnish schools of the new VET system. So basically, in the VET reform, also the decision-making processes they are a little bit different because they provide more authority to the actual VET providers. So it's not as centrally governed anymore. For example, previously in adult VET, Usually it was an external awarding body that provided the qualifications that, they had to give the approval. But now it's the actual education provider, education and training provider who has who is the awarding body. And in many other aspects as well, there's more authority on the education providers. And now each of these quality areas is structured so that it contains, well, first of all, it complies with the EQAVET quality cycle, and it can be taken separately as a peer review focus area. So even though there are so many of those, 15 of those quality areas, they can be quite easily taken in small portions. Now, for some reason, my slide doesn't want to move. Okay. Now it's moving. So here are the quality areas. These are the first 7, and these are more focusing on the sort of the education and training side and the pedagogy, and sort of also from the student's viewpoint. So it's about, of course, the organization and planning of education and qualifications, and then the actual application and admissions process, how it's done. And these following 5 quality areas that I've highlighted in yellow sort of comply pretty much to the European peer review for VET. So it's about developing, monitoring, and updating a personal competence development plan. So this is about the individual learning paths, really, and it's about taking into considerations the person's previous learning. It's about validation of prior learning. It's about looking at needs for guidance, perhaps, and it's an overall plan how this individual will go through the learning path to reach the agreed learning outcomes. Then the 4th one is about acquisition of competence. So in case there is a lack, for example, lack of some skills that need to be reinforced according to validation procedure and the individual learning path, then there is a plan. How do we actually acquire the missing competencies, or how do we strengthen the existing competencies? And it's not so straightforward, because obviously learning can take place in so many different learning environments, not only at school, but also virtually, with some simulators at work, in so many different, also in other education providers. That's also an option. And then there is a separate one only for learning environments. What type of learning environments that are of good quality can we develop? What are the minimum criteria for different kinds of learning environments? Of course, there's safety features, etc., taken into consideration in these. And then learning at work, and this includes the apprenticeships and training agreements. And the 7th one here is how you demonstrate your skills and competencies, how are they assessed, and how are the competencies verified. So basically this is the but prior to certification and leading to certification. Yeah. And then the following, the rest of the quality areas, they concern most about the impact of training and strategies and strategic planning, leadership and management, customer relationships and stakeholder cooperation, human resources, also of course student welfare structures, information management and quality management. So these are the 15 quality areas that we have designed to boost the VET reform of 2018. And then I promised to say a couple of words about a virtual peer review, which also in a way relates to Sasha's last slide, which sort of laid out sort of the weaknesses and strengths of, for example, international peer review. This piloting project, it was actually carried out in Eastern Finland, where I currently reside. It was done amongst 6 Eastern Finnish VET providers. And this was actually done and piloted quite a few years before the COVID-19 epidemic. And but of course it has become very handy since. And the reasons why the VET providers wanted to start piloting this was basically environmental reasons, because the distances in Eastern Finland are quite long from one VET provider to another. You can easily talk about 200 or 300 kilometers. It's about time saving, because then you don't have to travel, but you can just stay at your office or at home. And it's also cost effective, because you can then, you know, you don't need to travel, you don't need to put any money on traveling or accommodation, and also of course salaries, because you're saving time. And it is of course in accordance with the principle of sustainable development in many ways. Mainly why this was done, this pilot, was that the previous government, they in their sort of National Development Plan for Education, they stated that every single VET provider needs to have a quality system in place. So these 6 VET providers wanted to start testing how the peer review would work for quality management in their own organizations and how they could do it virtually. Mainly, the experiences were very positive. Well, basically the above points, bullet points, that it was time saving and it was cost effective and you didn't need to travel and it was saving the nature, etc., etc. It was good for the environment, which are really important values. It was seen as very effective because they reported that sometimes when you travel to a location and you meet with people, then a lot of time is consumed with all sorts of chitter-chatter and all sorts of side activities. But when it was carried out virtually, there was a very good plan. People had to do their homework, sort of the self-assessment and, you know, filling out the questionnaires and answering the questions previously, and then there was the interview part. So it was very effective and also saved time in that respect. And it was more concentrated on the actual issue than in person. Basically, the only negatives that the pilot project reported was that the body language is missing pretty much. So when you're interviewing a person, you can't really read much because you can't see the body language overall. Of course, you can see the face, but it's not, maybe it's not enough. So people miss the body language. And also people sometimes they said and miss the opportunity to see the actual facilities. But this, of course, when I'm thinking about it, it can be quite easily mended just by bringing a camera into facilities and showing live perhaps what the facilities are like. So everybody nowadays have pretty good mobile phones with live cameras, so it shouldn't be a problem anymore, but it just has to be thought of. And why I was saying that this was a good continuation in a way to Sasha's previous presentation before the lovely health break, was that these maybe are some answers to the international virtual peer review systems, because then you don't necessarily have to travel, and you don't necessarily, have to use a lot of money on travel and accommodation or extra salaries, but it can be done quite handily over online. Good. But that was my brief presentation about how the peer review process can help even in big VET reforms and how it can be done virtually. Thank you so much.